Think about the last 3 weekends. How many hours did you spend watering, weeding, spraying, or replacing dead plants? Now add up what you spent this year on soil, fertilizer, pest control, and replacements. Chances are it's $500 to $1,500. Here's the interesting part. You didn't need to spend any of it. Modern gardening treats plants like machines, soil like dirt, and you like free labor, so it stays expensive and exhausting. Indigenous growing systems did the opposite. They stacked plants that supported each other, built soil naturally, stored water, and thrived with little effort once established. Those systems still work today in yards, beds, and even containers. Here's how to build one. The fundamental difference between a traditional garden and a self-regulating system comes down to one word: relationships. In a conventional garden, you plant tomatoes in a row, peppers in another row, lettuce in a third row. Each plant stands alone. Each plant competes with its neighbors for the same nutrients at the same soil depth. Each plant attracts the same pests, which now have a buffet line instead of scattered meals. And because there's no diversity, there's no built-in pest management, no nitrogen cycling, no natural mulch layer, no soil building happening while you grow food. You're gardening in isolation. And isolated systems always require more intervention. Now look at how indigenous growers approach the same space. They didn't plant in rows. They planted in relationships. Corn, beans, and squash grown together. Not because it looked nice, but because each plant performed a specific function that supported the others. The corn grows tall and provides a trellis for beans to climb, which means you're using vertical space instead of sprawling across the ground. The beans pull nitrogen from the air through nodules on their roots and fix it into the soil, which feeds the heavy-feeding corn and squash without you adding fertilizer. The squash spreads wide leaves across the ground that shade out weeds, keep the soil cool, and reduce water evaporation by up to 60%, which means you're watering less and weeding never. This is called the Three Sisters, and it's not a cute gardening tradition. It's a functional design system that produces 20 to 30% more food per square foot than monoculture rows while building soil fertility instead of depleting it. But here's what most people miss. The Three Sisters isn't just one combination you copy and repeat. It's a template that teaches you how to think in relationships. Every plant you add should either fix nitrogen, provide structure, suppress weeds, attract beneficials, repel pests, or build soil. If it's not doing at least one of those jobs, it's taking up space that a functional plant could occupy. This is where companion planting stops being a list of what grows next to what and starts being a design language. You're not just putting basil next to tomatoes because a chart told you to. You're putting basil next to tomatoes because basil's strong scent confuses the insects that target tomatoes, and because basil stays low while tomatoes grow tall, so they're not competing for light. You're planting marigolds at the edge of your beds, not because they're pretty, but because their roots exude a chemical that repels root knot nematodes, and their flowers attract hoverflies whose larvae eat 400 aphids each before reaching adulthood. You're interplanting lettuce under taller crops because lettuce bolts in full sun but thrives in partial shade, which means the taller plant isn't stealing light, it's creating the microclimate lettuce needs to produce 4 to 6 weeks longer into the season. Now let's talk about soil, because this is where most modern gardeners are spending money to solve a problem their own methods created. You're buying bags of compost, bottles of fertilizer, amendments to fix pH, treatments for compacted soil, and every single one of those purchases is a band-aid for the fact that conventional gardening destroys soil faster than it builds it. Tilling breaks up fungal networks that move nutrients and water between plants. Leaving soil bare between plants invites erosion and weed seeds. Pulling out plants at the end of the season removes organic matter that should be decomposing in place. You're running a deficit system and then buying inputs to cover the losses. Here's how indigenous systems approach soil. They built it while growing food. When beans fix nitrogen, they're not just feeding themselves. They're depositing 2 to 3 pounds of nitrogen per 100 square feet in the root zone that stays in the soil after the plant dies, which feeds next season's crops without a single bag of fertilizer. When squash leaves shade the ground, they're not just suppressing weeds. They're keeping soil organisms alive and active instead of baking them to death in exposed soil where temperatures can reach 140 degrees on summer days. When plants die back at the end of the season, you don't pull them out. You cut them at the base and leave the roots in the ground to decompose, which adds organic matter deep in the soil profile, where it builds structure and feeds the microbes that make nutrients available to the next planting. This is called chop and drop, and it's how you turn every plant into a soil-building tool. You're not hauling away organic matter and then buying it back in bags. You're cycling it in place. The roots decay into channels that improve drainage and aeration by 25 to 40%. The leaves break down into humus that holds 6 to 10 times its weight in water, and you didn't spend a weekend or a dollar doing it. But here's the real secret. Different plants build soil in different ways, which means you can target specific problems by choosing the right species. If your soil is compacted, you plant daikon radish, which sends a taproot down 18 inches that breaks up hardpan and creates pathways for water and air. When the radish dies, that channel remains and the root decomposes into organic matter exactly where compacted soil needs it most. If your soil is low in nitrogen, you plant crimson clover or hairy vetch as a cover crop, which fixes 100 to 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre in a single season, and then gets chopped down before your main planting. The nitrogen is already in the soil, available immediately, and you didn't buy a single bag of fertilizer. If your soil is eroding or baking in the sun, you plant a living mulch like white clover under your main crops, which stays low, shades the soil, fixes nitrogen, and never needs to be replaced because it's a perennial that comes back every year. Water is the other place you're spending time you don't have, and creating dependency you don't need. You're watering every day because the soil dries out. The soil dries out because it has no organic matter to hold moisture. It has no organic matter because you're tilling it every season and leaving it bare between plants. And now you're trapped in a cycle where you're either standing there with a hose every morning or installing an irrigation system that costs $300 to $800 and still doesn't solve the real problem, which is that your soil can't hold water in the first place. Indigenous growers didn't irrigate daily. They designed systems that captured water, held it in the soil, and released it slowly to plant roots over weeks instead of hours. And those same strategies work in a suburban yard or a raised bed. Start with mulch, which is just organic material covering the soil surface, wood chips, straw, leaves, grass clippings, anything that creates a barrier between soil and sun. A 3-inch mulch layer can reduce water evaporation by 70%, which means you're watering once a week instead of every day, and the water you do apply stays in the root zone instead of evaporating by noon. But here's what nobody tells you. Mulch isn't just saving water. It's also feeding soil organisms as it breaks down, suppressing weeds by blocking light, and moderating soil temperature so roots don't cook in summer or freeze in winter. You're solving 4 problems with one material that you probably already have in your yard for free. Now, add ground cover plants, which are living mulch that never needs to be replaced. white clover, creeping thyme, or low-growing sedums planted between your main crops stay under 6 inches tall, shade the soil, hold moisture, and in the case of clover, fix nitrogen while they're doing it. You plant them once, and they come back every year. No reapplication, no cost, no maintenance. Then design your beds to capture water instead of shedding it. Instead of flat beds where water runs off, you create shallow swales or depressed planting areas where water pools and soaks in slowly. Instead of watering from above with a sprinkler, which trains roots to stay shallow and waste 30 to 50% of water to evaporation. You water at the base of plants with a slow drip or soaker hose that delivers moisture directly to the root zone and encourages deep root growth. Deep roots mean drought-tolerant plants that can go 7 to 10 days without water because they're accessing moisture from lower soil layers that don't dry out as fast. But here's where it gets interesting. You're stacking these strategies so they reinforce each other. Mulch holds water, which keeps soil organisms active, which builds soil structure, which increases the soil's water-holding capacity by 15 to 25%, which means you need less mulch over time because the soil itself is doing more of the work. Ground cover plants shade the soil, which reduces evaporation, which keeps the mulch layer moist, which speeds up decomposition, which feeds the ground cover. Water capture design concentrates moisture in the root zone, which allows plants to grow deeper roots, which access water that shallow-rooted plants miss, which means the system becomes more drought-resistant every season. You're not managing water. You're building a system that manages water for you. So here's where all of this comes together into something you can actually implement, because knowing the principles doesn't help if you can't apply them to a real yard with real constraints. You don't need acres. You don't need perfect soil or full sun or a blank slate. You need a design process that adapts these systems to whatever space you have, whether that's a 10 by 10 raised bed, a strip along your fence line, or containers on a balcony. Start by observing what you already have. Where does water pool after rain? That's where you put water-loving plants or design a small swale to capture runoff. Where does the sun hit longest? That's your high production zone for tomatoes and peppers. Where is there existing shade? That's where you plant lettuce, spinach, and herbs that bolt in full sun. You're not fighting your site. You're reading it and matching plants to the conditions that already exist. Then layer in your relationships. If you're planting tomatoes, you're also planting basil at the base for pest control and a nitrogen fixer like bush beans nearby to feed the soil. If you're planting squash, you're adding a trellis crop like pole beans or cucumbers to use vertical space, and a low ground cover like clover to shade the soil. Every planting decision is also a system decision. You're not just asking, what do I want to eat? You're asking, what does this plant contribute? What does it need? And what can I pair it with to reduce my inputs? Now add your soil building layer. If you're starting with depleted soil, your first season is about building as much as producing. Plant a cover crop mix of clover, vetch, and daikon radish in any space that isn't immediately needed for food. Let it grow for 8 to 12 weeks, then chop it down and plant directly into the residue. You just added nitrogen, broke up compaction, and created mulch without spending $1 or importing a single bag of compost. If you're working with existing beds, stop pulling plants out at the end of the season. Cut them at soil level, leave the roots to decay, and plant your next crop directly into the stubble. Every season, you're adding organic matter exactly where it's needed instead of hauling it away and buying it back. Then address water. Add a 3-inch mulch layer to every bed using whatever organic material you have available. Plant ground cover in the spaces between your main crops. Design your beds with a slight depression in the center so water doesn't run off. Install a soaker hose or drip system if you're watering regularly, or better yet, design plantings that don't need daily water once established. And here's the most important part. You don't have to do this all at once. Start with one bed, one corner, one container. Apply the principles. Observe what works. Adjust what doesn't. Add more nitrogen fixers next season. Expand your ground cover. Save seeds from your best performing plants and replant them, which means you're selecting for genetics that thrive in your specific conditions without buying new seeds every year. This is how indigenous systems stayed resilient. They weren't static. They adapted, observed, and improved season after season. You're not building a garden. You're building a system that gets easier, more productive, and more self-regulating the longer it runs. The first year requires the most input because you're establishing relationships and building soil. The second year requires less because the groundwork is in place. By the third year, you're spending more time harvesting than maintaining, and the money you use to spend on fertilizers and pesticides is staying in your pocket. This is the difference between gardening as a hobby that drains your time and gardening as a system that gives it back. You stop being a maintenance crew and start being a designer. The garden stops being something you fight and starts being something that works with you. This is not nostalgia. This is survival strategy adapted to modern constraints. And the time to start is now.